This is OwlUp, where learning happens in minutes, not hours. For a deeper journey, explore all our courses at owlup.co. Now, let's dive in. Welcome back to Chapter 3 of our series, The Story of Music, How Sound Became Art. In this episode, titled Classical Foundations, The Western Tradition, we'll explore the rich tapestry of Western classical music and uncover the key periods that shaped its evolution. So, let's dive in. 1,000 years of music history began with monks singing a single, unaccompanied line in stone-cold chapels. No instruments, no harmony, no applause. Yet those quiet voices eventually gave us Beethoven's Thunder and the soundtracks of our favorite films. How did that transformation happen? Those early voices didn't just fill chapels, they quietly engineered a new technology, a way to freeze sound in ink. Musical notation turned fleeting vibrations into something you could ship across kingdoms and revive centuries later, like sending a recipe instead of the finished meal. Once pitches and rhythms could be reliably written down, composers were free to experiment, stacking notes into harmonies, stretching melodies over longer spans, organizing time into ever more ambitious shapes. Across generations, this written tradition hardened into what we now call the canon, a cluster of works copied, studied, and performed so often that they began to define what serious music meant. Yet that canon was never static. New styles kept crashing in, old ones faded or were revived, and each innovation raised a deeper question. Who gets to decide which sounds become classical and which are forgotten? Soon, that growing canon started to shape power, status, and even identity. Courts hired composers the way tech firms hire star engineers, hoping new works would signal prestige and sophistication. Church modes slowly gave way to major and minor keys, and listeners learned to hear tension and release almost like plot twists in a drama. Public concerts emerged, turning music from a private luxury into a shared civic event. By the time Haydn and Beethoven were at work, symphonies felt less like decorative sound and more like arguments about what it meant to be modern. At first, those notated chants moved mostly inside cloisters and courts. But once the how of writing music spread, the who behind it started to matter more. Named composers gradually stepped out of anonymity, and with them came the idea of individual style. Listeners began to recognize that a piece by Josquin behaved differently from one by Palestrina. Music wasn't just sacred duty or courtly decoration anymore. It was a kind of audible handwriting. Polyphony, several independent lines at once, became the prestige craft. Composers learned to weave voices so that each line made sense on its own, yet locked into the others with almost architectural precision. Think of it as the difference between one cook following a recipe and a whole kitchen brigade timing their tasks so that every dish lands on the table hot at the same instant. Success depended on coordination across time, not just beauty in any single moment. As cities grew, so did the need for larger, more flexible ensembles. Opera houses, municipal bands, and court orchestras demanded music that could project across big spaces and hold diverse crowds. That pressure nudged composers toward more predictable patterns, recurring themes, balanced phrases, clear contrasts of loud and soft, solo, and tutti. These weren't just aesthetic choices, they were communication strategies in an environment where audiences were no longer a small, homogeneous elite. By the 18th century, these strategies crystallized into forms: sonatas, concertos, symphonies. A form was less a rigid mold than a shared expectation, a loose contract between composer and listener about how a piece might unfold. You didn't need theory training to sense when an opening idea returned transformed, or when a slow movement offered respite after a busy one. Composers like Haydn pushed that contract to its limits, setting up patterns and then playfully subverting them so that surprise itself became a source of pleasure. Crucially, these forms were modular. A successful trick in a keyboard sonata could be scaled up for orchestra. An operatic gesture could sneak into a string quartet. That portability helped certain solutions, like four-movement symphonies with a lively close, spread quickly across Europe's musical network, long before recordings or radio amplified their reach. Haydn's career is a good test case for how these forms worked in real life. Employed for decades by the Esterházy court, he had a captive orchestra and a steady demand for new pieces. That stability let him treat each symphony like a new software build. Keep the core architecture, tweak one feature at a time, see how performers and listeners respond. Across more than 100 symphonies, you can track experiments with surprise silences, long-term key schemes, and slow introductions that feel like raising a theater curtain. Beethoven scaled that inherited toolkit for bigger philosophical stakes. His ninth didn't just add a choir, it stretched the contract of a symphony so far that later composers had to decide whether to follow, resist, or reroute around it. Technology then widened the conversation. With the phonograph and radio, interpretations of these same works circulated globally, turning local court entertainment into a shared reference point from Vienna to New York to Tokyo. A century from now, foundations might feel less like marble pillars and more like editable code. Digital scores already behave like living documents. Scholars push updates, performers annotate, algorithms flag hidden patterns. AI tools can sift thousands of works the way a search engine parses the web, surfacing overlooked voices and oddities. The twist: the same systems that imitate Haydn or Price may also nudge humans toward ideas neither would have chosen alone. Today, those foundations feel less like a museum and more like open-source code. Sample packs, film scores, and video game soundtracks quietly recycle Baroque bass lines and symphonic arcs, the way a modern chef riffs on a centuries-old sauce. Your playlist may jump genres, but it's still haunted by those old decisions about how sound should mean. To go deeper, here are 3 next steps. Pick up the Iliad in the Robert Fagles or Robert Fitzgerald translation and listen along with the free Ancient Greece, the Iliad lecture series from Yale Open Courses, doing just Book 1 today while jotting 3 questions you'd love to ask Homer. Head to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy and read the entries on Plato and Aristotle, then watch one introductory lecture on each from the History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps podcast to see how they shape the Western tradition discussed in the episode. Explore the Great Books lists from St. John's College or Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book, and build a 6-month reading track. For example, Homer, Aeschylus, Plato's Apology and Republic, Augustine's Confessions, blocking off 2 30-minute reading slots on your calendar this week to actually start. This was OwlUp, your daily step forward. To keep learning with structured courses and more insights, go to owlup.co. Until tomorrow!